the Gaggle, where we challenge and, if necessary, destroy media narratives. I hope today we'll have some of our audio issues sorted out. One can but hope. Um, and already I can sense that there may be no. Okay, all right. So just hope, hope that everything will work out. It's a luck of the draw, toss of the dice, or whatever. With Rumble and locals and YouTube and anyway, it is now 9:07 p.m. in in Budapest, where the temperature is, it's warm. However, don't fall for all this heat wave crap. I mean, it's what they do is they go to the hottest part of any country, and then they measure the temperature because it's always hot there, and then they say, "Oh my God, there's this intolerable sweltering heat." Um, it's here in Budapest, it's kind of what you would expect on July the 1st. Um, those who live in the UK will recall that every summer, when there was doldrums in terms of the news, there really wasn't a lot of news in the summer, and the tabloids really had no idea, what's going to be on their cover, what's the lead story to get people interested. And so every summer you would have the headline, particularly in the Sun, "Phew, what a scorcher." And that's kind of what you're getting now, ridiculous hysteria in the Guardian about the heat waves, and people are dying of heat waves. It's don't take it seriously any more than you should take seriously the nonsense, but also peddled by the Guardian, about the tourists. How everybody hates the tourists. Everyone wants the tourists to go home. It's all a lie. Nobody wants tourists to go home. Tourists bring money. Tourists bring stimulus to economies, particularly economies in Europe, which generally aren't doing particularly well. So tourism actually is pretty much the only source of income in much of Europe. But the usual crowd, the Soros crowd, peddle this nonsense, how everybody hates the tourists. But strangely enough, the same media that tell us about how horrible tourists are and how the locals are rebelling at tourists are obsequiously, disgustingly, grovelingly, fawningly, sycophantically cover the wedding of Jeff Bezos. An absolutely obscene display of wealth, of privilege, and everything that you can think of. It's like the last thing anybody would want to see is a bunch of wealthy celebrities um, uh, indulging themselves in Venice. And yet, strangely, the Guardian, which gives this a lot of coverage, the Guardian doesn't say that this is terrible. The tourists are horrible, so we don't want the hoi polloi coming to Venice to look at the canals. No. But it's fine to have Bezos and his ugly wife, indulge themselves with all the usual empty-headed celebrities and Oprah Winfrey's and the rest. Now, I see Robert says, typical summer day here in Jersey, 85 Fahrenheit and humid. Audio very good, excellent. Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's kind of what it is here as well. I think the high in Budapest today was 86 Fahrenheit, kind of what you would expect on a July the 1st. And it's going to go down to about 68 or so at night. Exactly what you would expect. There was nothing, the whole heat wave hysteria. People are dropping dead in Europe through intolerable heat. crap. Don't die, because of course what they're trying to do, what they're obviously trying to do. I mean, it's not you don't need to be a rocket science to figure that out. Is to induce the hysteria, and to maintain the hysteria over climate change, because every time in the summer you have a hot day. What a shock! A hot day in the summer. Well, I wasn't expecting that one. So every time you have a hot day in the summer, you're told, um, sanctimoniously by the Guardian and the rest, that this is all because of climate change. How terrible climate change is. Now, before we get to the news of the day, I want to do something unusual. I want to go down memory lane. I'm sure many people will not remember this, but if there are any older listeners, they will remember this. This is from the 1972 Olympics. That was held in Munich, and it was quite a big event because Germany had, of course, notoriously held its Olympics in 1936. A very good Olympics, incidentally, but Hitler was there and presided over it, and so on. And then, of course, Leni Riefenstahl made that famous film about Olympia. But anyway, this is 1972, so the war's been over 27 years. West Germany was deemed to be a model democracy, so this was a reward for the model democracy. So they got the Olympics for 1972, and then they got the World Cup in 1974. So the 36 Olympics, they were in Berlin, but the Munich the 1972 Olympics were in Munich. And again, it was in some ways a controversial decision. After all, Munich really was where the Nazi Party started, but this was a reward for the Germans. And then, of course, the Munich Olympics have become famous for the murder of the Israeli athletes, and in particular the absolutely ridiculous, incompetent, idiotic way that the German police made a total hash of attempting to rescue the athletes, and which led to all the athletes getting killed. Um, um, so Rian Van Wyk says, "Hello, George. Hopefully you read the comments within the first 2 hours." Yes, I intend to do that. I think we're going to do a very short intro, and then we're going to try and address as many questions as possible, because I've been, people have complained with some justice that I don't answer questions, until late in the show. But we're going to do that today. We're going to try and answer as many questions as possible. But I want to just show this, and I'll explain why. This was the person who I think really was the star of the 1972 Olympics, which was this Soviet gymnast, Olga Korbut. And she really put women's gymnastics on the map. No one really had paid much attention to gymnastics before that. Men's gymnastics, kind of boring. And no one really cared much about women's gymnastics. It wasn't even deemed to be much of a sport. But she really put gymnastics on the map. So, but I want to just show a little bit of what she did and how the audiences responded to her. So let me find this. So let's take a look.
Olga Korbut is 17 years old, a little teenage girl who has suddenly come from a place called Grodno, Byelorussia, to perform perform before 11,000 people in the Olympic Games.
Jim, if she hits, you won't believe that she's the second best on her team. Now watch this. Watch this. Back somebody right to the other bar.
Has that been done before by a
Never,
girl?
never. Not by any human that I know of. Look at that. And she's second best. I don't believe it.
This then is a historic performance you're watching right now in gymnastics.
She's Kathy Rigby's size. Oh my! Wow!
Olga Korbut, who may well be on her way to winning the individual all-around championship, by the way. The marks here in the team championship count towards the individual, which will be decided on Wednesday. Woo.
Yeah, I'm raising my hands too.
Many of the crowd on their feet here in the Sporthalle in Munich. The Olympic jump really come to life, and they're booing and whistling that she only got 9.70. You think it could have been higher?
I gave her 11.
All right. Now, what's striking about that is, as I say, this is Munich 1972. So this was 27 years after the end of the war. And, this is a German audience. Many in that audience would have served in World War II. Pretty much anybody who was in his 40s and above at that time in 1972, anyone who was in his 40s or older will have served in World War II. Many of them could well have served on the Eastern Front. And there they were, leaping to their feet, applauding this Soviet athlete. Now, granted, she was very cute, she's very pretty, very charming, but that's not the point. Russian women are cute, pretty, charming. You would never get anything like that today among the Germans. It would just be inconceivable. And there would, there'll be any number of Russian athletes who would be just as pretty, just as cute, just as charming as Olga Korbut, and they would nonetheless not receive anything like this kind of adulation from the Germans, right? As the commentator pointed out, the crowd was booing because she only got a 9.7, and so 9.7, and this little footage doesn't show that this booing went on and on and on. It was a long time before anybody else could perform because the crowd wouldn't stop booing at that 9.7 score. So this is height of the Cold War, 1972. 4 years earlier, exactly 4 years earlier, August of 21st, 1968, the Soviet army moved its tanks into Czechoslovakia, ending the Prague Spring. And Soviet Union presided over by Brezhnev, Andropov, he's head of the KGB, and here were the Germans going crazy for this sweet Russian girl, and demanding that the judges change their score and give her a higher score. So what is that? And again, inconceivable that this would happen today. So how does it come about that this could happen in 1972, height of the Cold War, 4 years after the invasion of Czechoslovakia, 27 years after the end of World War II? That means within the living memory. The war was within the living memory of almost all Germans. Or not almost all, but of most of the German public. Most German men would have served in World War II. They would have served on the Eastern Front. And this is the so why what's it about? Well, the answer is quite obvious. The Soviet Union had inspired fear. Ever since the end of World War II, they inspired fear. And once you inspire fear, then people respect you. People love your athletes. They love your culture. They love everything that you have to offer. The problem is that Russia does not inspire fear, does not inspire respect, and nothing like this could happen today. They would, you could have a Russian athlete who would get, polite applause. Not even that. They wouldn't even, I mean, if you think of some Russian female athletes in recent times, and you had Sharapova. She never inspired any affection at all. In fact, she was punished, banned from tennis for quite a long time for her supposed infraction with taking banned substances. Though interestingly, it doesn't happen to other athletes. It does only happens to a Russian athlete. Or Sabalenka from Belarus. Also, she's certainly very attractive. Goes out of her way to be very charming. She doesn't inspire any affection, any respect. And well, that just shows. So that ultimately that's what Russia wants. Russia needs to do, and this is what Putin has been trying to do ever since he came to power. He somehow wanted the respect and the deference that was shown toward the Soviet Union extended toward Russia. But that, and so while there were negotiations, remember all of the various negotiations that took place between the Soviet Union and the West. I mean, there were the arms control treaties. I mean, remember the arms control treaties involved not just nuclear weapons. I mean, obviously they were part of them, but there were all manner of other agreements that were discussed, including the kind of the mutual reduction of forces in Europe. So the so-called cafe talks about withdrawing forces from Europe, also from Europe on both sides, and so on. That went on for years and years. But you can't get into those kinds of negotiations unless you're able to inspire fear. And since Russia doesn't do that, Russia doesn't get any negotiations at all. There are no arms control treaties at all that are going to be discussed. I mean, we know that the Americans basically walked out on the INF treaty. They walked out on Open Skies treaty. And of course, they walked out on the ABM treaty. All that's left is the New START treaty, and that's going to go. They're not going to renew it. The so-called the forces in Europe, well, it was CAFE, the Central Forces in Europe, or whatever it was called. They're gone as well. The West lost interest in that. There was no need for that, because once the West incorporated the former Warsaw Pact countries into NATO, there was really no need for any further discussions with Russia. And so that's Russia's problem. I mean, Russia wants this respect. Russia wants this deference shown. Once this was how the West comported itself towards the USSR. Why don't you do it now? Well, they say, they talk about, well, you promised us this or you promised us that. It's true. The West has consistently broken all of its promises ever since James Baker's "not 1 inch to the east" promise to Gorbachev in February 1990, and and all the rest. And Putin always brings them up every single news conference and everything. He brings up all of these events. The promises you made at the time of the overthrow of Yanukovych, the promises you made over the Minsk Accords, and on and on and on. And yes, the West repeatedly broke its word, but it did it because it saw that there were no real repercussions. Because to the West, it was quite baffling why the Soviet leaders tossed aside what had taken the Bolsheviks decades to construct. I mean, they had created, albeit not a very nice country, but nonetheless a great power, and a power that inspired respect and fear among all. And yet, strangely enough, Gorbachev and Yeltsin just simply tossed it all out of the window. Well, that doesn't, you're not going to win respect that way. You show what you're made of, and you do it ruthlessly and decisively in the way that the Soviets did it, and that's what they did in Czechoslovakia. Of course, everyone condemned it and whatnot, but it was quickly forgotten. That German crowd that was going crazy for Olga Korbut, they weren't thinking about, hey, that her country extinguished the Prague Spring. Look what they did to Dubček. That was really tough. No one was thinking that. Where today, they blame a soprano, Netrebko, or somehow she is to blame for Putin. And Valery Gergiev, these musicians, they're somehow taken to be responsible for Putin. But nobody thought at that time, nobody dared to think that the Soviet athletes were to blame for anything that the Soviet Union did. Anyway, so that was that little opening, and so somebody says, and Ethelbert says, I don't see it. Sabalenka is very popular in the West, and Sharapova was even more. I think we're out of the woods after the shameful Wimbledon ban, although the flags will come only after the war. I totally disagree with you on that. I mean, because I think Sharapova was never particularly liked. I thought that the ban on her was a serious ban. I mean, you banned somebody for how many months it was. That was a serious thing. It was obviously unjust because these bans are never are never applied consistently. But they hit her, but all sorts of questions with every other tennis player, but no one ever got punished except Sharapova. And Sabalenka, look, the media gave her a terrible time after that French Open final, really harsh. And then Sabalenka, went out of her way to grovel and to try and get herself in among the to try and get a good press. But Sabalenka's always had a very I would say very critical media attitudes towards her. So I don't see it a lot. I think it's hard to think of any recent Russian athlete who has enjoyed any kind of a positive coverage. Medvedev is a very good tennis player. Up in the top five in the world. He has never had good coverage in the media. Never liked very much by the fans. And then of course one hardly Steve would bring up Djokovic. Djokovic of course is a Serb. He has never enjoyed. I mean, given his stature in the game, given his accomplishments, um, always had a kind of rather cool press towards him, and the crowds are often quite hostile towards him. Now it's changed a little bit in the last couple of years because he's really coming to the end of his career, and there's a certain sympathy for him, because it's kind of amazing that a man his age is still able to compete at the top level, and I think that he gets a certain sympathy. But throughout his career, despite his amazing achievements, he has never enjoyed any of the adulation of Federer and Nadal and so on. Anyway, that's that. Now, what else is going on? You've had the big beautiful bill. At least it passed the Senate, and then of course they're going to go in the House, and I guess they'll carve out something after whatever the House passes, and then they're going to try and combine the two, and then eventually they will come up with the final version of the big beautiful bill. And we go through this drama whenever there's a new administration. Will they be able to get that bill through? Because every administration, every new administration, in its first year, has a big budget and tax bill that it's going to push through Congress. It's nearly always touch and go. It's going to go down the wire. And eventually it wins, it prevails, usually with one vote, two votes. And then usually that same administration gets punished in the midterms because it does precisely all the terrible things that nobody really wants governments to do, which is to increase the deficit and massively raise spending that cannot be paid for, and then the administration gets punished in the midterms. I mean, this happened. Bill Clinton in 1993. He also went down the wire. He prevailed, I think, one vote that he got it, and then of course he got punished for that in '94. Biden, similar in his case, he also had the big, budget thing. Obama had his stimulus, got punished in 2010, and I have no doubt that Trump will lose in the midterms. I mean, this formula of tax cuts, and then you're cutting back on Medicaid. You know what I mean? No one's buying the idea that when you're cutting back Medicaid, and it's just going to be waste, fraud, and abuse. Basically, saying, yeah, you're cutting taxes, you're raising the deficit, and you're paying for the tax cuts with cuts in Medicaid and in food stamps. It's particularly problematic for Trump because this isn't exactly a very populist tax and budget bill. That has a little bit of populist elements. The no tax on tips, or the no tax on overtime. But fundamentally, the big tax cuts are for the rich, and he is hitting Medicaid. Now, Republicans normally don't care very much about that, because we'll say, okay, well, our voters, they're not on Medicaid, so what do we care? Um, but with Trump, is a little bit more problematic, because his supporters often are on Medicaid. They do rely on Medicaid, and so they're not going to like this very much. Again, his supporters, they rely on food stamps. Um, so I, Trump generally has a problem that when it's an off year, when he's not on the ballot, and of course he never will be again, because he's just got the midterms, and then he's got, and then that's it. This is his last term, um, and so he's going to find that the midterms are going to be quite punishing for him, and as I think we've always pointed out, the moment the midterms are over and the Democrats take control of the House, then of course the impeachment begins, and and so uh, and so that's going to be quite difficult. Now I see some people are commenting about a topic that they want addressed, and I think it's a very good topic, namely this interesting development today. There was a telephone conversation between Putin and Macron. Now, one has to assume that it was at the initiative of Macron, because Putin really doesn't put in calls to anybody. Um, so this was their first conversation since, I think, September 2022. And let's take a look at the readouts. First of all, let's take a look at the French readout of this conversation, and then let's look at the after that, the Russian readout. So this is the telephone conversation with the president of the Russian Federation, Vladimir Putin. And so it says, the president of the Republic and the president of the Russian Federation spoke for more than 2 hours today by telephone to discuss the Iranian nuclear program and Ukraine. Regarding Iran, the president of the Republic recalled the responsibilities of the permanent members of the United Nations Security Council, and therefore of France and Russia. That's a very courteous tone. He mentions that Russia and France are both permanent members of the UN Security Council, and that as permanent members, they have special responsibilities. He stressed the urgency for Iran to comply with its obligations under the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, and in particular, to fully cooperate with the IAEA, whose inspectors must be able to resume their work without delay. He expressed his determination to seek a diplomatic solution that will allow for a lasting and rigorous settlement of the nuclear issue, the question of Iran's missiles and its role in the region. The two presidents decided to coordinate their efforts and to speak soon to follow up on this issue together. So notice in the French readout, no mention of Israel, no mention of what Israel and the United States had just done, the unprovoked aggression. Um, there's a talk about the inspectors who need to resume their work without delay, even though the inspectors were working without any interference. And the reason they're not in Iran right now is that Iran has been attacked. And, Iran has been subjected to an unprovoked attack. And he brings up the question of Iran's missiles, which Iran is obviously not prepared to discuss because Iran regards that as a separate issue. And then brings up in a polite way, but we know exactly what he's getting at, its role in the region, which is again in a code for Israel doesn't like, or Israel and the United States don't like Iran's exerting its influence in the region. Anyway, the French readout continues. Regarding Ukraine, the President of the Republic emphasized France's unwavering support for Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. So it's the usual palaver. He called for the establishment as soon as possible of a ceasefire and the launch of negotiations between Ukraine and Russia for a solid and lasting settlement of the conflict. The two presidents will continue to discuss this issue as well. The tone is quite cordial. He didn't say immediate ceasefire. He said he called for the establishment as soon as possible of a ceasefire. That's not quite the NATO position. It's certainly not been the position of the coalition of the willing, because they demand immediate ceasefire. He says as soon as possible. And the launch of negotiations between Ukraine and Russia for a solid and lasting settlement of the conflict. So it's reasonably conciliatory. He says, okay, France's unwavering support, fine, whatever that means. We support Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. That's our official position. But he says Russia and Ukraine need to negotiate. So, and therefore, he's also suggesting that it should be that the tone is that there should be bilateral negotiations between Ukraine and Russia. It means no role for France, no role for the UK, no role for the United States. So bilateral negotiations between Ukraine and Russia. Anyway, that's the French readout. Let's look at the Russian readout. Telephone conversation with French President Emmanuel Macron. The heads of state discussed in detail the situation in the Middle East in the context of the Iranian-Israeli confrontation and American strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities. So that wording is not in the French readout. Vladimir Putin and Emmanuel Macron noted the special responsibility that, again, that's from the French readout as well, in maintaining peace and security, including the Middle East, as well as in preserving the global nuclear non-proliferation regime. Again, that's in the French readout. In this regard, they emphasized the importance of respecting Tehran's legitimate right to develop peaceful nuclear energy and continuing to fulfill its obligation under the Treaty of the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, including cooperation with the IAEA. Well, this is definitely not what's in the French readout. The French readout did not say that it is important to respect Tehran's legitimate right to develop peaceful nuclear energy. It's not that. There's no mention of that at all. Just said, he has to comply with the Non-Proliferation Treaty. We need to get the IAEA inspectors in there as soon as possible. And then he goes on. The leaders expressed their support for the resolution of the crisis around the Iranian nuclear program as well as the resolution of other contradictions in the Middle East, to be achieved exclusively by political and diplomatic means. They agreed to continue contacts for the purpose of possible coordination of positions. And then, when considering the situation around Ukraine, Vladimir Putin recalled that the Ukrainian conflict is a direct consequence of the policies of Western states, which for many years ignored Russia's security interests, created an anti Russian foothold in Ukraine, condoned violations of the rights of Russian speaking residents, and are now pursuing a policy of prolonging military actions, feeding the Kiev regime with various modern weapons. Well, obviously, none of that made it into the French readout. Um, but since it was a 2 hour long telephone conversation, so they had to talk about something. So I'm sure Putin did mention something along those lines. Um, and then, speaking about the prospects for a peaceful settlement, the Russian president confirmed the fundamental approaches to possible agreements, which should be comprehensive and long term, provide for the elimination of the root causes of the Ukrainian crisis, and be based on new territorial reality. So that's a standard now Russian formulation: elimination of the root causes of the crisis, and to be based on new territorial realities. The conversation with Vladimir Putin and Emmanuel Macron was substantive. Um, when we talk about Macron, it's always very hard to gauge what he's really about. Uh, Obviously, he feels, not unreasonably, that France has really reached the point of complete irrelevance in world affairs. Just about everything now, whether it's Ukraine, the Middle East, Israel, Iran, Israel, Lebanon, is done really under the sponsorship of the United States. The only thing that matters is what is the United States going to do. I mean, we had that the embarrassing event last week of the NATO summit, in which the only thing that everyone was preoccupied with was to keep Trump happy, because it was really important that Trump be kept on board, for basically um, maintaining the level of support for Ukraine. Without Trump, nothing is going to happen. And so that's the only thing. Everything just revolves around the United States. So Europe really, there's no real role for Europe. So when Macron makes this phone call to Putin, you have to think that he's trying to find some way of putting himself at the center of anything. Now, he's talking here. I mean, the first part of it, of the conversation, is obviously about Iran. Now, France has almost no role in this at all. I mean, France is just one of, along with the UK and along with Germany, was a party to the JCPOA. But the JCPOA essentially ceased to exist after Trump walked away. There's nothing France can do to revive the JCPOA. There's nothing Russia can do to revive the JCPOA. They can talk about, oh well, let's bring in the IAEA inspectors, but that really doesn't depend on France in any way. That really depends on Iran, whether Iran is ready to go back to negotiations. And you'd have to think Iran probably isn't. Um, but in terms of what is France going to do? France, the UK, and Germany will move um, in I don't know, in September and October. They're going to move to snap back sanctions against Iran, and they can do that. Russia will not be able to stop this, so there will the sanctions will snap back um, against Iran. Um, so that does put Iran in a tight spot. And I want to talk a little bit about that. But this is what Iran does now. Um, but if you look at the readouts, so the Russian readouts and the French readouts, it's hard to see any real progress on any front, anything that's possible. I mean, Macron just said, well, his position is, territorial integrity of Ukraine and sovereignty of Ukraine. That's the official French, British, NATO position. And then Russia says, well, we got to address the root causes of it, and basically it's all about NATO expansion, and then we have to accept the realities on the ground. But France cannot do anything on Ukraine because all of it depends on what the United States does. Now, initially, many people, and I at various times went along with it, various times didn't go along with it. But at the time, it seemed like Trump may decide to take the bull by the horns and bring this war between Russia and Ukraine to an end by cutting off all assistance to Ukraine. And at various times, he did seem to do that. He did it in the first few days of the administration, then he did it briefly after the disastrous meeting with Zelensky. But he hasn't, since then, since that time when he ended the intelligence sharing and then ended the stoppage of arms deliveries to Ukraine. So since he ended that, really, he's pretty much been on board with Ukraine. I mean, it's hard to see any real difference on Ukraine between the United States and the rest of NATO. And of course, what France and Britain and Germany and the rest of NATO want is for Trump to impose sanctions on Russia. And that was clearly, they've been applying a lot of pressure on Trump to sign on to the Lindsey Graham bill, the one that says, okay, we're going to hit all countries that do business with Russia, purchase oil and gas from Russia and uranium and whatever. We're going to, hit them with a 500% tariff. I mean, there are obviously going to be cutouts. I mean, after the United States purchases uranium from Russia, I don't think the United States is going to hit itself with a 500% tariff. But it'll have some effect, and that's clearly the French position, because they keep thinking that somehow, well, you send even more arms to Ukraine, you impose some more sanctions on Russia, and somehow Putin will come to the table. So with Macron, I mean, as I think we've pointed out before, what he does on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays is often in contradiction with what he does on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays. Um, he may have thought that it was a good idea to have a chat with Putin, but it's not. It just isn't clear to me at all that this conversation really led to anything. Um, I don't think neither is in any position. Neither Russia nor France is in any position to affect the the situation with Iran and its nuclear program. Now, Russia could, if it decided to provide Iran with some serious, serious air defense systems. But this is an ongoing. This has been an ongoing thing. The Iranians have been asking for um, air defense systems from the Russians for a long time, and Russia hasn't provided them. I mean, they had a few S-300s, not too many. Israel destroyed them, but the S-400s, Russia never provided them, and it's clear Russia has no intention of providing them. And I think we even talked about this in a recent live stream, that when Putin was asked about this, well, what about the S-400s? Oh, well, we haven't been asked. It's just not, that hasn't really come up. But of course, the reason is that Russia, to not the same extent, but certainly to like the United States, has a special relationship with Israel. And Putin said this the other day. They said something, 2 million Israelis speak Russian. That's their first language. He says Israel is a Russian-speaking country. It's like, hey, it's better than Ukraine. Ukraine, they kind of they prohibit you from speaking in Russian. In Israel, they speak in Russian. So, so for him to to provide the S-400s to Iran would be a blow to his good friend in Israel. And remember, when he spoke to the Iranian president, I think it was the Iranian president rather than Khamenei, he spoke on the same day that he spoke to Netanyahu. So here was Russia that had supposedly issued this very strong condemnation of the Israeli attack on Iran. Very strong. The Russian Foreign Ministry issued 2 strong statements, and then at the UN Security Council and Yebenzia, condemning this unprovoked aggression, and yet Putin has this chat with the Netanyahu, and it's not even and it's not clear at all what Russia intends to do to punish Israel. I think Russia isn't intending to do anything to punish Israel. Now, then, so I have to be somewhat skeptical. It's an interesting item. This telephone conversation came out of the blue. The first conversation really in about 3 years between Putin and Macron. But I don't see anything in either of the readouts that would suggest that there's going to be any major policy changes to be expected. Now, I just want to say something about Iran. And there's a lot of talk that Iran now, after this unprovoked attack, after this humiliation, after having negotiated in good faith, first to agree to the JCPOA, then to negotiate in good faith with the United States, and then after that, they get attacked by Israel, and then after that they get attacked by the United States, and that Iran obviously has no interest at all to engage in any more negotiations, and that Iran has realized that the best course of action would be to leave the Non-Proliferation Treaty, stop cooperating with the IAEA, and to develop nuclear weapons. Now, I'm not buying this for 1 minute. Iran has kind of left it late. If it was going to do it, if it was going to develop nuclear weapons, I mean, should have been doing it 10, 15 years ago. At this stage, Iran doesn't really have any deterrence. So, you have, if Iran were to announce that it's withdrawing from the Non-Proliferation Treaty, it would immediately come under attack by the United States, obviously by Israel, and maybe, in this case, maybe by France and by the United Kingdom jointly, because they might well say, hey, you're supposed to be part of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. You can't just simply walk out on the Non-Proliferation Treaty. You need to be punished for withdrawing from the Non-Proliferation. So this will be a joint attack. Even NATO might join in. Yeah, we got to punish Iran. Iran can't just simply walk away from the Non-Proliferation Treaty. So this would be a NATO, US, Israel attack on Iran if Iran were to announce that it's withdrawing from the Non-Proliferation Treaty. And Iran really doesn't have too many means of defending itself. We've seen that its air defenses had been largely destroyed by Israel. Yes, it's true that Iran did inflict pain on Israel, did land some heavy blows on Israel, and this certainly shattered some of Israel's image of itself as impregnable. That it cannot be hit. Now, Iran has certainly shown that it can hit Israel, but there's no comparison between what Israel and the United States did to Iran to what Iran did to Israel. There's just no comparison. And similarly, that attack on that U.S. base in Qatar was a joke. I mean, it was just, Trump gave them an opportunity. Hey, you want to get this out of your system, you want to do a workout with a punching bag, go ahead and do it. So, given that Iran really doesn't have any deterrence, and given that that the Israelis and the Americans have smelled blood. They've done it once. They've never done it before. They've never attacked Iran before. But now that they've both done it, and while Israel has certainly suffered, some blows, the United States hasn't. Then they're going to do it again, and they will absolutely do it again in circumstances in which Iran would announce that we are withdrawing from the Non-Proliferation Treaty and we're not going to cooperate with the IAEA inspectors. So in those circumstances, absolutely, they would bomb Iran. So I don't think that is feasible. Now, the alternative would be for Iran to start working in secret. In other words, they're not going to bring in the IAEA. They said, no, you can't come in. And we're going to try and revive in secret our nuclear program. We maybe, some parts of it may well be salvageable, or maybe it's already been hidden from view. There's some of, they still have a lot of enriched uranium lying around somewhere. They've hidden it somewhere, and they're just going to do it in secret. So they have to enrich uranium, and then of course they have to weaponize it. So they have to, figure out how to create a nuclear warhead, and then how to fit that warhead onto one of their ballistic missiles. They could probably do that. Now, the problem they have there is that the Americans are going to get wind of it very quickly. I mean, they're not going to be able to. You got satellites, up in the air, whizzing around, watching everything that the Iranians are doing. So the Americans would figure out very quickly that Iran has relaunched its enrichment program, and since it's doing it in secret, then they say, yeah, it's they're enriching in order to build a nuclear weapon, and then again, the Americans would come in and bomb, along with Israel and probably along with NATO. Since NATO always looking for relevance, and NATO having essentially signed off on Trump's bombing. I mean, that was clear at the NATO summit last week, that they were all happy with what Trump had done to Iran. So if Iran tries that they're going to get bombed, and Iran just doesn't have anything at the moment that can be used to defend itself from an American-Israeli NATO attack. So it's going to be very difficult for Iran to get itself out of this tight spot. Now, there may be a way out, and I'm not. This isn't my idea, but there has been an idea floated around that that they're just kind of creating a consortium of powers that would enrich, but that consortium would involve Iran, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates. I mean, I'm not saying this is realistic. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but in theory, it might be an idea whereby Iran at least would still be able to enrich, but you'd have to do it in a consortium with other Gulf states. I don't think the Americans, unlike the Americans under Trump, would sign off on it. I don't think the Israelis, while Trump is in office, will sign off on it. But life is long, and Trump's only going to be there for another 3.5 years, and it's quite likely that there'll be some kind of a reaction will set in against Trump, and that the next man in may be more of a kind of an Obama-like figure who will try to work something out with Iran. I mean, Obama, terrible president. I didn't like him at all. But there was one issue on which he did distinguish himself from George W. Bush, and that was Iran. And that he was willing to engage in negotiations with Iran and allow this minimum amount of enrichment. So the story appeared about a month ago in the Guardian. It's kind of worth looking at, because it may be a way out of this the situation. Well, here's incidentally, before we get to that, is Trump that sent out I think yesterday, absolutely ridiculing the idea, which was floated last week, that somehow Iran was that Trump was interested in negotiating some kind of a deal with Iran. We even covered that, a story in CNN, which sounded like the Americans were serious. I mean, the story was far-fetched. I didn't believe it for 1 minute, but it was. I thought it was likely that the story was floated by the White House to suggest that Trump is serious about working something out with Iran. But Trump has now squelched that. And he says, tell phony Democrat Senator Chris Coons that I'm not offering Iran anything, unlike Obama, who paid them billions of dollars under this stupid Road to Nuclear Weapon JCPOA, which would now be expired, nor am I even talking to them since we totally obliterated their nuclear facilities. So this pretty much categorically rules out any kind of negotiations, any kind of a deal or anything. But we shouldn't necessarily take this as Trump's final word on the matter. He's mercurial and tends to change his mind. And last week he seemed to be sounded quite conciliatory towards Iran. Here he's fuming and ranting and raving, as he was. We talked about with over Khamenei's address to the nation, in which Khamenei declared that he had won against Israel, and yet Trump went absolutely berserk in response. But anyway, here's this article in The Guardian. It appeared in May, and it says Iran proposes partnership with the UAE and Saudi Arabia to enrich uranium. A consortium would help Tehran deal with U.S. objections and tie in Gulf states to its enrichment program. And then Iran has floated the idea of a consortium of Middle Eastern countries, including Iran, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE, to enrich uranium in an effort to overcome U.S. objections to its continued enrichment program. The proposal is seen as a way of locking Gulf states into supporting Iran's position that it should be allowed to retain enrichment capabilities. So you get there's a consortium, and there's some kind of a distribution of roles within this consortium. So it's not clear how they're going to distribute the roles, but they're all going to take part. It says Tehran views the proposal as a concession, since it would be giving neighboring states access to its technological knowledge and making them stakeholders in the process. It is not clear if Abbas Araghchi, the Iranian foreign minister, made the proposal in relatively brief 3-hour talks with the U.S. in Oman on Sunday. The fourth set of such talks, but the proposal is reportedly circulating in Tehran. After the talks, Araghchi flew to Dubai, where he spoke to the UAE's foreign minister, Sheikh Abdullah bin Zayed Al Nahyan. The UAE currently does not enrich uranium for its nuclear program. The consortium would be based on Iranian facilities with enrichment returned to the 3.6% levels set out in original 2015 deal. And then the consortium idea was first proposed by former Iranian nuclear negotiator Saeed Hossein Mousavian, and then Princeton physicist Frank von Hippel, long before the current Tehran-Washington talks. In a widely read October 2023 article in the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, under the consortium, the Saudis and UAE would be shareholders and funders and would gain access to Iranian technology. The involvement of the Gulf states would be seen as an extra insurance that Iran's nuclear program was for entirely civil purposes and not the pathway to building a bomb. And then if the Saudis and the UAE were permitted to send engineers to Iran, an extra form of visibility about the program would become possible, leaving the international community less reliant solely on the IAEA. And then this idea was taken up in an article in Responsible Statecraft. It says, let's make a deal, enrichment path that both U.S. Iran could agree on. And it says, although a regional nuclear consortium had been previously advanced as a theoretical alternative, the collapse of the talks as a result of military action against Iran now positions it as the most compelling path forward for all parties. Before the war, Iran was already suggesting a joint uranium enrichment facility with Saudi Arabia and UAE. For Iran, this framework could achieve its primary goal, preservation of a domestic nuclear program, and crucially, its demand to maintain some enrichment on its own territory. The added benefit is that it embeds Iran within a regional security architecture that provides a buffer against unilateral attack. And then creative proposals suggest a division of labor. Iran, for instance, could maintain its prized technological capacity by manufacturing the centrifuges, while the enrichment itself could occur in a neutral country or on an Iranian island separate from the mainland. And then this could provide fuel for all members while allowing each side to claim a strategic victory. All right, now, most people would respond and say, yeah, and bleeding pigs may fly. It ain't going to happen. And probably that's right. It ain't going to happen. Nonetheless, I mean, you can see that something like that could be worked out. And Iran certainly has not ruled this out. But Israel obviously won't accept it. And the United States under Trump will also not accept it. But as I said, Iran, I mean, Trump isn't going to be there for that long. I mean, it's just 3.5 years, and then somebody else will come in. Iran, it plays the long game. They've been used to it, to doing so throughout their history, and they may well just think, well, let's wait Trump out. Trump took such an extreme position on Iran without any clear, without setting out any clear American objectives there. Set out Israeli objectives, but no clear American objectives. Without any support from the American public, and having cited dubious intelligence claiming that Iran was on the brink of nuclear weapons, essentially buying into the usual Israeli claptrap, and then presenting claptrap of his own by dismissing his own intelligence agencies again. So twice he dismisses his own intelligence agencies. This is the DIA, who said, well, I don't think you've destroyed it. You set it back, but I don't think you've destroyed it. So given the extreme position that he took, I think there's going to be a reaction against Trump, just as there was a reaction against George W. Bush, given the extreme position that he took in essentially cooking the books on Saddam Hussein, invading a country on a bogus pretext, and that, of course, led to Obama. So I think something along those lines that we were reading out, that consortium idea, I can see the next president signing off on that. Now, the question is, will Trump and Israel just simply sit on their hands over the next 3 or so years? I think that's unlikely. I think they've smelled blood in the water, and I think they're going to attack. It's what they've done before. They feel that Iran is in a weak position, and this is the time to attack. And we know Israel's position is, of course, regime change. They want that government in Tehran gone. And Trump has shown no real will to resist Israel, other than on this sort of tactical thing, when Netanyahu was going to drop, enormous payload on Tehran, just as Trump had announced a ceasefire, Trump didn't like being made to look a fool by Netanyahu, and so he got very angry. But in terms of Israel's strategic goals, Trump has shown no willingness to resist that. Anyway, now let's take a look at our questioners. So first, let's take a look at our locals board, a locals community that that worry about the condition of the dogs and try to keep the dogs keep them going through the summer. Now let's take a look here. And Summer Petrus, always good to see you. He says, the dogs have informed me that I must listen in and report back on audio quality. Yeah, you're right there. Audio quality or otherwise of the live stream, the contents they dismiss with derision. You're absolutely right. They that's what they care about, is the audio of a sufficiently high quality. The contents, yeah, they think that's third-rate stuff. So yes, so thank you very much, Summer Petra. DJ says, is this thing on? Yeah, that's exactly the question the dogs are saying. Hey, we can't do everything. You're asking us to do everything, do all the heavy lifting, and we don't get remuneration for it. That's not a good business model. They reject with derision this kind of business model. So we mentioned about Robert and the Jersey, 85 Fahrenheit. And then DJ says 87 in Kenosha. Worst heat wave since last summer. Exactly. It's the worst heat. It's like, whoa, this is so hot. So yeah, right. It hasn't been as hot as this since, let me think, last July the 1st. It's always like this. Summer comes around every year. Every year it's hot. I mean, amazing. I mean, ever since I was a child, it's always been this strange phenomenon that in July and August, it's hot. Wow, it's just amazing. It has to be with climate change. It's got to be about climate change. Anyway, DJ says about apropos of Olga, they wouldn't even let Olga compete today. No, I really don't. I really don't think she would. I think they would find some reason to suggest, oh, she's hasn't condemned what Russia's doing in Ukraine, and there would be none of this applause. I mean, if you watch these old footage, it's the amazing applause that she was receiving. She wouldn't get any kind of applause. None. The commentators would all be rooting for those the American girls, who are all kind of nasty and bad tempered, not at all likable. I mean, Corbett was actually kind of likable. She had a sweet smile, but the today's commentators they wouldn't be at all charmed by her sweet smile. Anyway, yeah. So, but I absolutely agree with you, DJ. Yeah, they wouldn't let her compete. Certainly, she would not be able to compete. Under the Russian team. There would not be a Russian team. There's no Russian team allowed. No Russian flag, no Russian national anthem. They would just get, I can't remember what they have a particular title, the Olympic team or whatever, but it's the word Russia cannot appear on it. Anyway, W. Baker says, George, getting here late. Oh, I'm sorry about that. Just heard as I'm coming in about the BBB, the big beautiful bill, will add $5 trillion to the debt. Yeah, that's the latest calculation. These clowns don't have any intention of ever paying that back. No, they don't. And of course, they keep running up this debts. and then the servicing of the debt is quite a whack. So that becomes an enormous burden on everybody else. So you have to, because you have to service the debt. That's a big chunk of change that you have to come up with every year. So yeah, it's a nice racket. And the strange thing is, of course, that Trump promised this, that he's going to try and address this problem. He hasn't addressed the problem, and in fact is added to it. And then he's talked in this brutal way about anyone who has criticized it, and he's attacked all sorts of people who, unlike Trump, have been deficit hawks for many years, or deficit hawks, or critics of the debt for many years. So Thomas Massey, he's a libertarian, and he thinks it's a really bad idea, generally, government intruding into every single thing imaginable, and government establishing programs that, once they're established, they can never disappear. That was the whole point of the sort of the Trump-Musk promise, is we're going to end these government programs. But no, the moment you create a program, and that's the easiest thing in the world, just create a government program, then you cannot end it. You cannot end that program, whatever it is. Think of any, giving money to anybody, boom, that program is there in perpetuity. And this precisely is what Thomas Massey has campaigned against throughout his political career, as has Rand Paul. And Trump is attacking them. But this is part of his base, that libertarian anti-government movement was a part of his base. And that's, he's in danger of losing that, not leave aside all the issues of non-interventionism and going to war, but basically that libertarian anti-government movement, Trump is just insulting with these ridiculous attacks. So in fact, these clowns don't have and then nor is it mathematically possible. They're going to flip the monetary game board and go digital. Central bank digital currency in some form or another. Looks like it. So MAGA got them on board for a revised version, even a spoof version of Build Back Better. I agree, and that's exactly it. That's what they've done. And this is turning out to be a traditional Republican administration, which is built, increasing the debt, increasing the deficit, massive handouts to the military-industrial complex, tax cuts, obviously, for the wealthy, and then cutbacks on social programs that benefit, theoretically, the people who had voted for MAGA. So that formula is unsuccessful, and Republicans have shown that they were unsuccessful. They lost one election after another. Remember that era, going back to starting from George H.W. Bush in 1992 through to 2016. So you're talking about a quarter of a century. In only one of those elections, the election of 2004, in only one of those elections did the Republicans win a majority of the vote. Every single one, even 2016, which the Trump won through the Electoral College, he still lost the popular vote. But the point is that formula, it doesn't work for the Republicans. Tax cuts, and then and then to be paid for by cuts in social programs, and then everything for Israel, everything for the military-industrial complex. It is an absolute killer. Steve K9, always good to see you. He says, don't care much about Macron. No, that's fine. But Iran's approach has always seemed a little illogical. I agree. They don't really need enrichment to have nuclear power, for example, get fuel from Russia or China. On the other hand, they don't seem to have worked on a nuclear weapon. Yeah. Do one or the other. Yeah, I agree. Making a bomb is probably the wisest. The enrichment program seems to have only served the purpose of shortening the time to get to a weapon if they need it. They do. Well, I agree with you. I think they got the worst of all worlds, which is that by enriching to 60%, they helped fuel the Israel Zionist uh, lobby in screaming that somehow Iran is on the brink of having nuclear weapons. Um, and then of course then that would have been okay, as you say, if that actually intended to do so. But given that they don't have nuclear weapons, and everybody knew that they didn't have nuclear weapons, which is why, of course, they felt free to attack Iran, just as they felt free to attack Iraq, and felt free to attack Libya, felt free to attack Yugoslavia, because they didn't have nuclear weapons. So they knew this perfectly well. So Iran did play into that game. There was no need to do so. And the argument that somehow they enriched the 60% in order to strengthen their hand in negotiations was amazingly naive. It didn't strengthen its hand. They negotiated with the Biden administration about return to the JCPOA. The 60%, they began enriching soon after Trump's withdrawal. It was first up to about 25%, and then they kept just moving up and up and up. It didn't act as any kind of an incentive to negotiate any deal. So I agree with you. It didn't make a whole lot of sense. You are giving ammunition to your enemies by enabling them to scream that Iran is close to having a bomb, but you don't have a bomb, which means that they can attack you without fearing any serious repercussions. Um, but as I was saying earlier, I don't think Iran's options now are very good. I don't think they can just move forward with withdrawing from the Non-Proliferation Treaty. I don't think they can move forward with developing nuclear weapons. I think that Israel and the United States now have Iran in their sights, and any indication at all that of the slightest of suspicious activities on the part of Iran will be met by bombing. They bombed it once; they're going to bomb it again. So that's why I think that Iran's best bet probably is to wait Trump out if they can, because I think there's a real danger that they're going to get bombed again and again. But wait Trump out and then think that maybe they can work out something along the lines that this mentioned, this some kind of a consortium. Relations between Iran and Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states has improved. I don't think it would be too much of a problem for them to work out some kind of a consortium. Israel, of course, wouldn't tolerate it, but the next man in could take a harsher view of Israel. I mean, remember, even Obama, was a little different in his attitude towards Israel than Trump has been. Iran, after all, Obama defied Israel. Israel applied a lot of pressure against Obama over the JCPOA, but Obama went ahead and did it anyway. So it could be that the next man in will say, "Hey, this consortium idea is pretty good, and I'm not going to allow Israel to mess this up." Israel would never does anything unless the United States has its back. So I think that that's why. So it could be that the next man in would be more amenable to working something out with Iran. But I really don't think, and I think Iranian leaders are pretty shrewd. They see their vulnerability, the weakness of Iran, and I think they know that leaving the Non-Proliferation Treaty, they're not in a good position now to do that. Anyway, thank you, Steve, for that question. Marty, always good to see you, Marty. Always thank you for your generosity. And you've got a nice picture there of the dancing, doing the hokey cokey. Starmer, Zelensky, Macron, Schmerz, and Tusk. What a gruesome collection. Thank you, Marty, as always, and thank you for all of your contributions to the Gaggle page. I mean, they're priceless, often so funny. And Robert says, Murray Rothbard says the neocons started as Trotskyists and never really gave up the dream of remaking the world. They simply traded Marx for American empire, revolution for intervention, and planned economies for planned foreign wars. He called it perpetual war for perpetual peace, and said they both they said they hijacked both conservatism and libertarianism and statist militarist aim. Does that sound right to you? I agree that that does sound right, that was the goal. But it goes together with another aspect of it, and I think he picked up on that. That it goes together with this Zionism, and that's a really interesting kind of combination that of you have Trotskyism and Zionism kind of combined, whereby Israel became replaced the Soviet Union. Remember, the Soviet Union was a state to be worshipped. That back in the 1930s, it was this utopia. The last best hope of mankind was the Soviet Union, and but once that was abandoned, and I think Trotsky was kind of instrumental in helping Western intellectuals abandon that. So Trotsky kind of waged this campaign against the Soviet Union. It was what was the bureaucratic equilibrium? It was a kind of it was a dictatorship of the bureaucracy. State capitalism. All of that. And Trotsky was kind of influential there. But then these people needed another state to worship as the last best hope of mankind, and so all of that idolatry that was directed toward the Soviet Union and now became directed toward Israel, and so somehow neoconservatism combined Trotskyism and Zionism. So it combined the notion of yes, using government, not just domestically. You basically just rectify society, all done by government. They had the same contemptuous attitude toward the people as the Bolsheviks did. The people are just dumb, stupid, greedy, short-sighted, and they need government to solve their problems for that. That was the Bolshevik attitude, and that certainly was the attitude of the kind of the people around FDR and that kind of the statists. But what the neocons did is then essentially transform that into a global movement. You use governmental power to solve every problem around the world. Every country in the world has to dance to America's tune, in the way just as domestically everybody has to dance to the government's tune here at home. So it did become that way, and they had this power at their disposal because ultimately there was really nothing very much that anyone could do to challenge the United States. The only power that did so was, of course, the Soviet Union, and of course they turned against the Soviet Union with a ferocity, um, because it stood in the way of that whole globalist, ameliorist agenda that the United States was supposed to enact. There was, of course, another aspect which, I mean, that one would have to go into, um, for the hostility towards the Soviet Union on the part of the neocons, and that was, of course, the Jewish question. Um, the Soviet Union, particularly under Stalin, turned against the Jews, turned against the Jewish origins of the Soviet Union. You know, the Bolsheviks, without question, were heavily Jewish. Um, Stalin turned against that for a variety of reasons, and he particularly turned against Israel when Israel, in a way, made itself out as, just as I said, as this new the new Jerusalem. This was an intolerable, impermissible insolence towards the Soviet Union. So Stalin had thought, hey, we were the champions of Israel. You know, we were among the first to advocate for the creation of the state of Israel. We were the first to recognize Israel, and then Israel turns around and asks the Jews of the Soviet Union to leave the Soviet Union and to go to Israel. This infuriated Stalin, and then the purges, the purges in the late Stalin era of the late 1940s, early 1950s, were all focused on Jews, Trotskyism, and Zionism. Um, and this, of course, then fueled much of the neoconservative animus towards the Soviet Union, and particularly on this question of Jewish emigration from the Soviet Union. So you know, you have all these different aspects of the neoconservative movement, the hatred that they had toward the Soviet Union, you know, the same Soviet Union that at least their parents had once worshipped, um, and then raised up as the new avatar of enlightenment, this horrible little state of Israel. Um, so yeah, I kind of thought, but I'm not sure Murray Rothbard engaged with that really, because I think that only became apparent in later years. I mean, he wrote that book in the 1970s, but the full scope of the globalist agenda, the hatred of the Soviet Union, the worship of Israel, all of that, the way that the combination of these movements, I think, became much clearer in later years. Then Steve goes on, according to John Helmer, Putin's affection for the Jews is well beyond the mourn for the Russian elite or public, a topic that is spoken in whispers aside. Real problem, posting comments now. The Putin's affection for the Jews, it seems to go back to his time in Leningrad. I mean, he's talked about that he had some close friends who had looked after him. They were Jews. I mean, it may be a personal thing, but it also may be, these are powerful people within Russia. You know, the rich Jews in Russia. They wield a lot of influence, and they continue to wield a lot of influence over the Russian leaders. I mean, how does someone like Abramovich, given given everything we know about Abramovich, how does he get to be always at the center of things? Um, so I think it's a powerful, influential group in in Russia, and I don't think Putin can cross them. I don't think Putin. Number of them incidentally have Israeli citizenship, including Abramovich. Um, so I think it's very much a part of Putin's special relationship with Israel, and goes the other way. So that's why, in any hope that Russia will go do anything more for Iran beyond these empty condemnations that at the United Nations, I think it's a forlorn hope. Um, um, anyway, Robert says, doesn't Iran have a Jewish population numbering in the thousands, much of which is anti-Zionist? Yeah, that's true enough. Um, Steve asks, can Iran keep a weapons program secret? I don't think so, no. I think that would come out. Any indication, even the slightest hint that they have a weapons program will be met by force. And it's going to be United States, Israel, and NATO. It'll be a joint attack on Iran. I mean, now that Rubicon has been crossed of attacking Iran, they're not going to hesitate. Even those these wimpy NATO member states, they'll join in. Um, um, and Steve says, I read that the damage to Israel was far greater than reported in the West, and Iran could do much worse. But a real issue is Israel's 250 nuclear warhead in Iran's zero. That would be the deterrent. I agree that would be the deterrent. It's hard to know how much damage Iran inflicted on Israel. I think they did inflict damage. I don't doubt it. But I think in comparison with what Israel did to Iran, I don't think it's equivalent. I mean, Israel managed to wipe out its its IRGC command, killed off political leaders, it killed off nuclear scientists. It destroyed a lot of Iran's launchers. Um, but I think the damage it's caused was more a psychological damage. I mean, nobody has been able to attack at the heart of Israel ever. I mean, Israel has fought wars in Sinai. Israel fought wars at the Golan Heights, um, in the West Bank, in Gaza, Lebanon, but it's never really its own territory has always remained immune to attack. Other than Hamas sending some firecrackers. So I think that it's a psychological blow, but still the question is that in any future attack, it's always going to be the United States. United States is going to be leading the pack. Israel with a junior partner. Now, Iran may still retaliate against Israel, and again, some of the missiles will get through, as happened this time. But I don't think it'll be comparable to how much damage Iran will suffer. I mean, Iran is just simply not on the same technological plane as Israel, and certainly not the United States. So I think any future attacks on Iran, particularly on the issue of nuclear weapons, will always be the United States. And really, this whole thing has been the United States. The United States, conceived the project, and Israel just, was launched it, but the United States finished it. Um, um, anyway, Steve says, an enrichment consortium enrich and build a bomb, or just buy fuel. George, like Hungary. That's a very good question. I think all of this is still up in the air, how this would work, and whether there's going to be a division of labor. Be a consortium. Iran will provide the centrifuges. Maybe the enrichment will take place in some neutral territory. Maybe it'll be in the UAE or whatever. So, I think there will be, I think they'll just figure out some way in which, or maybe, it'll be kind of Buggins' turn as to, where the enrichment takes place at a particular time. Um, I, you know, Look, I think this is still really at the level of speculation, um, but it's kind of worth thinking about that if you can get other powers involved, like Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates, that have good relations with the United States, then it's possible that you could sort of work something out whereby they all take part in the enrichment. Um, but not for the time being. I mean, Trump's never going to agree to anything like that. Um, and then Steve goes on the issue of Iran's damage to Israel. There are several people suggesting that Israel wanted the ceasefire because they were running out of AD missiles, and again that there were a lot of serious damage in Israel. Well, yes, I think there are people, but my feeling is yes, there was a great deal of. I mean, for Israel did suffer some damage. The problem is that the people you're quoting, you know, this is the same crowd that the Napolitano crowd who come along and tell us that Israel has suffered huge damage. Hezbollah is going to destroy Israel. Iran's capable of crushing Israel. I mean, they've been saying all this. I mean, you got to be realistic. Yes, Israel suffered some damage, but there's no comparison between the two. And so I think that this is the line that's coming from the Napolitano crowd, and I haven't seen any evidence of this. It's a nice story, and clearly people want this to be true. Understandable. I'd like it to be true as well, but I'd like to see some more evidence that Israel has suffered serious damage, other than damage to its psyche. And then Steve goes on, the enrichment consortium is ridiculous. Hungary will not embark on an enrichment program for the PAX-2 nuclear plant, which is being built. Well, Hungary is, that's entirely under the control of Russia. Now, it's the enrichment consortium would be something in which they would all three states, maybe other states, would take part. It would be a joint operation. As I said, I don't think it's at all feasible that anything like that can get off the ground while Trump is there. But there was talk of this in the past, and Trump isn't going to be there forever. So I think that it could absolutely be discussed in the future, in which they would all be kind of guaranteeing one another for their security. It'll be kind of a mutual security treaty. Obviously, Israel would find it unacceptable. Obviously, Trump's America would find it unacceptable. We might get an Obama like figure, next time around, who would say, "Hey, this is not a bad idea." And then Robert says, "I've heard the same thing, that Iran limited its strikes to military target. This accounts for why civilian casualties in Israel were so low versus the indiscriminate slaughter of Iranian civilians by the Israelis." Yeah, though the Israelis did that because the Israelis went in for these assassinations. And so, yes, they hit some oil refineries and so on, but I haven't heard that they inflicted huge damage of the oil refineries and airport. I mean, maybe they have, but I haven't heard that that these were that these were hugely damaging, rather than something that can be rectified um, quite quickly. The problem is that Iran's commanders were assassinated. That always is a blow. Hard to wage a war when your entire command has been eliminated, and I think the launchers and its missile producing capabilities were badly damaged, and of course, I think its nuclear facilities. We don't know exactly the condition, but I'm assuming that it's badly damaged. Whether it's been completely obliterated, it's badly damaged. But either way, I don't think that's the issue here. I mean, I think we're getting lost in the weeds here. The issue is that if Iran engages in any move towards, withdrawing from the Non-Proliferation Treaty, if it moves towards developing its weapons towards developing nuclear weapons and so on, if it did that, it would come under overwhelming attack. So I don't know. We're getting bogged down on how much damage they did to Israel and vice versa. It doesn't matter. Iran, the Rubicon has been crossed. Iran will come under severe attack by the United States, Israel, and by NATO. That's really the problem, that they can't just simply, oh, no, what a great idea, let's leave the Non-Proliferation Treaty and then let's develop nuclear weapons. Iran wouldn't be able to do it. Just, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, yes, it could have done it. Now, after this attack, they're not going to do it. Anyway. And then, anyway, so Anne-Marie, always very good to see you. Thank you so much, as always, Anne-Marie, for your generosity. And then Anne-Marie asks, is there actually any truth in the Western claim that Iran wants to obliterate Israel, or is that just propaganda? My understanding is that is indeed just propaganda. I think whenever they've talked about of Israel disappearing from the pages of history, is that kind of racist supremacist state based on kind of essentially one people's religion. That state of Israel will cease to exist. But Iran has never said, well, we are going to destroy Israel. Everyone else is going to destroy Israel. Iran says that it will disappear from the pages of history. And I think plenty of people think that this state will eventually disappear, that the racist Jewish supremacist state that denies rights of citizenship to non-Jews, that state will eventually disappear. So I think that's what, there was a deliberate mistranslation of Iranian statements that they intend to wipe Israel off the map. Instead, they just say the Jewish supremacist state will eventually disappear. And plenty of people say that. That there's nothing so unusual about that. The thing, I think the Jewish supremacist state will eventually disappear. May not happen next year or the next decade or next 25 years, but eventually it will disappear. That's what the Iranian leaders have been saying. So I think there was a deliberate misinterpretation. But thank you so much, Anne-Marie. And then NK Mayadi says, from what I know from the most official sites, the demands regarding the destruction of Israel haven't been heard lately. I read Iranians calling Israelis animals. Meanwhile, as well, talk is cheap. But I always find Russia puts much emphasis on. Well, I agree with that. It's a matter of. And then Steve says about Ahmadinejad. Yeah, no, that's exactly, that was Ahmadinejad, and that's the point. Is that Israel will disappear from the pages of history, and what he meant, not that Iran's going to try and destroy Israel. He's not even calling anyone for destruction, but that the Jewish supremacist state will disappear. Anyway, I have to do a broadcast now, a kind of an interview, so I have to uh, end this. There are still some issues that I would like to address, but thank you, everybody who has contributed. Thank you so much for all of the questions. We'll be able to get into some issues at greater length on Thursday. So please come back, join us on Thursday for the live stream, 3 p.m. Eastern Time. So please come back then. See you. All the best. Good night. Bye-bye.